The Secret Story of Him. Chapter 12. Ashes of the Promised Land. Houston's Edge. By the time him and his group arrived in Houston, the Texas-Mexican War had long since concluded, ending nearly 20 years earlier. This conflict, also known as the Texas Revolution 1835 to 1836, had ended with the decisive Texian victory at the Battle of San Jacinto on April 21, 1836. General Sam Houston's forces defeated the Mexican army led by General Antonio López de Santa Anna in a swift and brutal engagement that lasted just 18 minutes. The victory secured Texian independence from Mexico, establishing the Republic of Texas as a sovereign nation. Despite this, tensions remained high. Mexican forces had withdrawn south of the Rio Grande, but the newly declared republic faced economic struggles, political instability, and constant threats of renewed conflict with Mexico, which made Houston both a sanctuary and equally volatile. Houston, now the capital of the fledgling Republic of Texas, was a burgeoning settlement named after General Houston himself. The city was little more than a cluster of crude wooden buildings along the banks of Buffalo Bayou, teeming with new settlers, traders, and former soldiers seeking their fortunes. For him and his group, Houston offered a precarious refuge. The remnants of war were evident in the town's rough demeanor, scarred veterans, displaced families, and the ever-present specter of slavery, which remained legal and deeply entrenched in the Texian economy. As free and enslaved black people navigated this volatile environment, the promises of freedom and survival remained uncertain, overshadowed by the harsh realities of a republic still defining its identity. Now August 31st, 1857, the sanctuary of Houston's shadows had crumbled, leaving him and 800 souls exposed like raw nerves under a savage sun. Every night, him went out to the surrounding plantations hunting for food, gathering supplies, and freeing the chained. More and more they came stumbling in, broken chains, still warm around their wrists, terror and hope warring in their eyes. They gathered in the thick darkness where the city bled into wilderness, their whispered prayers mixing with the drone of mosquitoes and the distant baying of dogs. He stood among them, transformed. Gone was the scrawny mixed-blood, yellowish pale-skinned, blue-eyed child who'd once flinched at his own shadow. At 17, he towered at 6'4", his 200-pound frame hewn from years of brutal labor and desperate flight. His caramel skin, slick with sweat, cut the moonlight like oiled bronze. Those hazel eyes, his mother Khaleesi's eyes, burned with an intensity that made even hardened men step back. The delicate features that once marked him as Master Samuel's spawn had been scorched away, replaced by the chiseled countenance of his grandfather, the legendary Baga warrior Gadisa. His very presence carried the weight of prophecy, a living testament to bloodlines stronger than iron. To plantation owners, his name was a curse spat through clenched teeth. To the enslaved, it was a prayer, a promise that chains could be broken. Stories of his raids spread like wildfire through the quarters. Him, the ghost warrior who could melt into darkness, who spoke to spirits in forgotten tongues, who left nothing but empty shacks and dead overseers in his wake. But Houston's promise was poison. The city's edges squeezed them like a noose, and their hunters came wearing new masks. Lawmen, merchants, even fellow slaves with defeat beaten into their bones. What had seemed like shelter became a trap, freedom's dream souring in their mouths. When Adam and Silas scouted the road ahead, the response was apocalyptic. 3,000 men materialized from the Texas dust, their ranks bristling with rifles and writhing with dogs bred for blood. The worst were the forced trackers, enslaved people with collars biting into their necks, driven by whips to hunt their own. Some had broken entirely, becoming more vicious than their masters, clawing for scraps of approval with acts of unspeakable betrayal. The hardest losses were the betrayals. Not everyone's resolve proved as strong as their initial courage. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear drove some to despair. 12 broke away one night, convinced they could bargain for mercy by leading the hunters to the main group. Him had seen their tracks leading back north and understood immediately. They had to move. Patwa ordered the entire company to change direction, knowing those 12 would soon learn that the South's appetite for vengeance far exceeded its capacity for mercy. Their fate, when word finally reached the group weeks later, served as a grim reminder that there could be no turning back. The journey southward was grueling. The group traveled under the cover of darkness, using the dense forests and winding rivers to shield them from prying eyes. During the day, they rested in hidden camps, where the elders and children could recuperate. Ida, ever resourceful, took on the task of preparing the group for the harsh terrain ahead. She scavenged the materials to weave lightweight packs for carrying food and water, and she devised a system for camouflaging the group's movements. Patwa, with her sharp instincts, scouted ahead to identify safe routes and avoid patrols. Henry, the young brother of the fallen Silas, coordinated the movement of the larger group, ensuring they stayed quiet and cohesive. Mesa's steady presence provided comfort to the children, who clung to her during the darkest nights. In those days, Him couldn't escape the ghosts of Mama Kalisa and Sino. Their faces haunted his thoughts, their voices sharp and unrelenting, driving him forward when all he wanted was to rest. Him stood at the edge of despair, his presence a grim reminder of what survival demanded. Mama Kalisa's spirit clung to him like a shadow, her teachings carved deep into his soul, shaping every brutal decision he was forced to make. The swamp didn't just try to swallow them, it tried to break them. Each step was a battle, each breath a rebellion against nature itself. The swamp was no lie, it was another enemy. The group slogged through muck that clung like tar, every inch a contest of wills. Him led from the front, his frame battered but unyielding, his voice the anchor that kept them moving. He knew the truth. Freedom wasn't handed to you. It was wrestled from the jaws of death. When the hunters found them near Uvalde, he knew there could be no retreat. The group was too weak, too sick. The children could barely stand, let alone flee. The time for running was over. This was where they would make their stand. The moonlight glinted off the barrel of Him's stolen rifle, a relic he'd taken from the overseer's quarters during the plantation rebellion. He counted their ammunition, 24 rounds, shared between 4 rifles. The others armed themselves with machetes, shovels, and stones. Greatness didn't wait for the perfect moment. It demanded action, no matter how desperate. The first wave of hunters came just before dawn, their torches painting the swamp in hellish hues. He crouched low in the underbrush, his eyes locked on the silhouettes moving through the trees. He raised his rifle and whispered, "For Jangaba, for Dinah." The crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Him's shot took the lead hunter in the chest, throwing him backward into the mud. The others hesitated, their momentum faltering, but the dog surged forward. Patwa, wielding a machete, leapt from the shadows and cut down the lead hound with a single swing. Blood sprayed the air, and for a moment the hunters wavered. Now, Him roared. The group sprang from their hiding spots, their makeshift weapons swinging with brutal precision. They fought like cornered animals, driven by a fury that could only come from years of oppression. Him moved through the chaos like a storm, his rifle cracking, his knife flashing. He didn't fight for survival. He fought for something bigger. As the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, the swamp had transformed into a grotesque battlefield. The air was thick with the metallic stench of blood and the acrid tang of gunpowder, mingling with the swamp's natural decay. Bodies were strewn across the waterlogged terrain, both the hunters and the hunted, their lifeless forms tangled in the gnarled roots and stagnant pools. Blood seeped into the muddy ground, darkening the murky waters into a macabre mire. In the heart of the carnage stood him, his chest rising and falling in labored breaths. His body quaked with the weight of exhaustion and the haunting echoes of violence. The ragged remains of his clothes clung to his sweat-slicked skin, torn and stained by the night's brutal struggle. His gaze swept over the scene, his eyes burning with the mixture of anger, grief, and the faintest flicker of resolve. "We move," he said, his voice ragged but unyielding. The survivors gathered what they could: food, weapons, anything useful. They left the dead behind, their names carved into their hearts. Each loss was a wound, but each victory was a step closer to freedom. The fight for freedom wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. The hunters pushed them harder, closing the gap every time the group tried to find shelter. He knew they couldn't keep running, not without striking another blow. Knew the Rio Frio? He hatched a plan. He and a small group would lure the hunters away, giving the others a chance to cross the river. It was a gamble, but freedom didn't come without risk. Him led the decoy group into the thickest part of the swamp, their movements deliberate, their tracks loud enough to catch the hunters' attention. When the dogs came, Him turned and fired, his bullets finding their marks. The hunters followed, their rage blinding them to the trap. Potwa, hidden in the trees, dropped a flaming branch onto the trail, setting the swamp alight. The fire roared to life, cutting off the hunter's advance. Him and his group slipped away, their faces lit by the flames of their rebellion. At the Rio Grande, the group faced their final test. The river was a wall, a barrier between slavery and freedom. The hunters were closing in, their numbers bolstered by reinforcements. "We fight here," Him said. His voice carried the weight of every battle they'd fought, every life they'd lost. Not just for us, for everyone who's still chained. The group formed a line at the riverbank, their weapons ready. Him stood at the front, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. The hunters charged, their torches and rifles flashing in the night. The battle was chaos. Him fought like a man possessed, his knife carving through the air, his rifle roaring till it was empty. Potwa stood beside him, his machete a blur of steel and fury. They fought with the fury born of desperation, striking with every ounce of strength they had left. The hunters came in waves, relentless and merciless, but Him and his group refused to yield. Makeshift weapons clashed against steel, fists met flesh, and the swamp became a battlefield where survival was the only victory that mattered. They fought until the hunters began to falter, their ranks breaking under the relentless resistance of those they had underestimated. The river became a grim witness to the carnage, running red with the blood of oppressors and the oppressed alike. Cries of pain and defiance echoed through the trees as bodies fell into the murky waters. Each swing of a blade, each cry of defiance, carried the weight of generations of suffering. When the sun rose, the survivors crossed the Rio Grande. Their bodies were broken, their numbers cut in half, but their spirits were intact. They had earned their freedom, not as victims, but as warriors. He stood on the Mexican shore, his body trembling, his wounds weeping blood. He looked back at the river, at the battlefield they had left behind. "We made it," he whispered. Freedom wasn't born in the absence of struggle. It was forged in the fire of resistance, in the courage to rise against despair, and in the unyielding hope that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. To deny the oppressor, defend the powerless, and depose the chains of tyranny, that was the true measure of greatness. Freedom is not a gift bestowed in silence, but a thunderous cry carved from blood and bone. It rises from the depths of human suffering, born not of comfort, but of unbreakable spirit. Every revolution begins with a whisper that becomes a roar. The moment when the oppressed refuse to be silenced, when hope transforms from a fragile dream into an unstoppable force. True liberation is not granted. It is seized with bare hands and unshakable will by those who would rather die fighting than live on their knees. To deny the oppressor, defend the powerless, and depose the chains of tyranny, that was the true measure of greatness. Words Sino believed with all his soul, words that carried courage and strength, words that demanded sacrifice for the sake of humanity. After crossing the Rio Grande into Mexico, it was a moment of profound joy and relief for him and his group. The stark contrast between the oppressive slave-holding territories they had fled and the promise of freedom in Mexican lands ignited a sense of hope they had scarcely dared to believe in. Mexico, having abolished slavery in 1829 under President Vicente Guerrero, symbolized a sanctuary where their humanity could no longer be denied. Tears streamed down faces weathered by hardship as they stepped onto the soil of a nation that represented liberation. For the first time, they felt the weight of fear begin to lift, replaced by cautious optimism. They embraced one another, their shared struggle now giving way to dreams of a life where they could rebuild and reclaim their stolen identities. The landscape itself seemed to echo their joy. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the desert in warm light as the group moved forward, weary yet jubilant. Children who had endured unimaginable suffering now played freely, their laughter carrying on the wind as if to defy the horrors they had escaped. For the adults, this was more than just a destination. It was the culmination of sacrifices made and battles fought. They spoke in hushed but excited tones about what lay ahead, envisioning a life where they could farm their own land, raise their families in peace, and rediscover the cultures and traditions that slavery had tried to erase. Every step into Mexico was a step toward a future that was finally their own. After a grueling journey that spanned over 16 months, Hen stood still, unable to hold back the tears as they began to flow. Memories of Mama Kalisa, Sino, Michael, Elias, Mesa, and the countless lost children consumed him. Their faces, their voices, and the sacrifices they made weighed heavily on his heart. Their sacrifice was our survival, he whispered to himself, the words hollow against the vastness of the desert sky. But the cost was etched into his body and soul, countless open wounds, the sheer exhaustion of carrying others to freedom, and the unrelenting grief of those who could not make it. As the reality of their loss hit him like a storm, his knees threatened to buckle, though his resolve kept him upright. Around him, the scene was one of jubilation. Patwa and Ida, unrestrained by the burdens that shackled him, danced and sang with unbridled joy. The group now swelled to about 360 souls. Most of them elderly and children praised the ancestors with song, offering thanks for their deliverance. Yet, Him could not join in their celebration. Rage boiled within him, stifling any notion of relief. His thoughts were tethered to the chain left behind, the voices still crying out for liberation, and the countless others still suffering under the weight of cruelty. Though surrounded by freedom, he felt like a shadow among the light, his mind restless with the weight of the battles still left to fight. The secret story of him. It's a secret.